Welcome to Introducing Virginia Mysteries. I'm Andrew Wood, the creator of this limited podcast series that adapts the Introducing Virginia Mysteries book by Libby, Ellwood, and Febronia Farowez. All of us are students at Shenandoah University in Winchester, Virginia, just 90 minutes west of Washington, D.C. And this project that we've been doing this summer of 2026 is being advised by lecturer and faculty professor Rachael Hammond. This project, we focused on the current renaissance of mystery literature in Virginia, analyzing especially how the works of Edgar Allan Poe established a culture of mystery literature, which has been engulfed by Virginia's unique history and identity. This podcast is just a glimpse of the depth that Libby and Febronia go into in the book. If you'd like to learn more, you can find Introducing Virginia Mysteries online or in print. We read and researched 8 mystery novels set in Virginia, and we had the chance of interviewing several incredible authors. We met so many wonderful people and traveled around Virginia to see the mystery for ourselves. Now, be warned, every episode will include spoilers to the novels, and if you're listening with children, please be mindful many of the episodes do contain adult topics. In this first episode, Number 1, Cutting It Open, we will investigate Patricia Cornwell's post-mortem. And we got the chance to speak with Cornwell herself, as well as Dr. Marilyn Miller, Professor Emeritus of Forensic Science at VCU. If you're curious about the music you're hearing right now, I composed it. My job for this project was to interpret all the 8 books that we read into a piece of music. So I composed a theme and variations on O Shenandoah for piano, and you'll hear that throughout all of the episodes. Stay tuned for episode 9, where we will get into the composer notes. Each episode will follow roughly the same format. We'll begin with Libby and Febronia discussing the chapters and then moving on to our guests. So here is Libby and Febronia.
Okay, so Postmortem is a book that was written by Patricia Cornwell. Mm-hmm. It was one of the first fiction novels that she wrote, because before that she wrote like a biography of one of her close friends. Oh. But so it's set in Richmond, VA, with the main character, Kay Scarpetta, who is the first female chief medical examiner.
Snaps for the women.
Snaps for the women,
I
yes.
can't snap, but
especially,
you snap.
especially in 1990, where this was before we actually had our first chief medical examiner, and so people were like tossing this book across the room. The angry man that didn't like that there was a woman in charge. But so it's about Kay Scarpetta, and on her like first couple of weeks in the job, she's already dealing with this giant murder mystery where this guy keeps killing women, and at the time that the book starts, they're already on their 3rd or 4th victim. I want to say 3rd. I could be off a little.
Okay.
But he was already on his 3rd or 4th victim, which is a woman. Who would have guessed? All 4 were women, but he killed a bunch of women, and Scarpetta cannot figure out who this guy is, because the only thing he's leaving behind is a chemical on these women, and when she puts it under like a laser light to try and figure out what it is, it just shows up as glittery. They can't identify it.
What?
Yeah. It's just glittery. They have like glitter all over their bodies, basically.
Wait, disclaimer, I haven't read this. So this is making me think it's like a unicorn, like killing or something.
I
Unicorns
totally
have something to do with it.
I totally forgot that you have not read this at all.
So this is actually like really great for me. Continue.
Yeah, so Scarpetta's just dealing with like trying to figure out who the murderer is, while also dealing with backlash from the men that she works with that don't want her to be working there, like the what's his name again? He was the commissioner.
Got it.
The commissioner did not like
Ellwood.
that. Yeah. The commissioner did not like that she was in charge, so he tried to frame her later in the book to get her fired.
Oh. Wow.
That's all I'm going to tell you. You have to read the rest to find out more.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
I don't find out if it's unicorns right now or not?
Nope.
What about Cornwell? What can you tell us about
Give
Cornwell?
me some deets about her.
Okay, so Cornwell, Cornwell was born in 1956 in Florida, and she had a little bit of a rough childhood. She actually talked about it in her memoir, which is her most recent publication.
Mm-hmm.
But like when she was young, around, I think she mentioned six, somewhere around that age range, 6 to 9, something like that.
I know.
Her dad left their family, and because of that, her mom kind of slowly lost it, and at one point had to go to the hospital, in which Cornwell ended up getting put into a foster home, except her foster mother was not the greatest person in the world. She would lock up Cornwell's dog in the basement and would not let her see her except for maybe like once or twice a day when she needed to feed it, and that was about it.
Aww.
Yeah, it was a little sad hearing it from Cornwell herself, because she also told us this in the interview we did with her. But she had a good friend named Ruth Graham, who kind of helped her during a lot of those times. And so as she got older, she ended up going to college and getting her degree in English journaling,
Woohoo.
writing stuff. Yeah. And then she went on to write a bunch of books, and a lot of them ended up as New York bestsellers.
Nice.
Surprise, surprise.
No, I love that. What were some of the themes that you discovered throughout this book, some key points?
Well, I think we made it clear from the description of the book that feminism is definitely one of them, because Kay Scarpetta is like fighting all these people that are being absolute jerks to her, literally just because of her gender, or thinking that they can do whatever they want to her because she's a woman, and what's she gonna do? But she does quite a lot. And then
Dishes
I also
it right back. That's what I'm hearing.
I also think there was definitely intergenerational trauma in this book, which is a common theme that we will start to notice in all the books that we do for this project. For our project. With her niece Lucy, that's where most of the intergenerational trauma is occurring, and I think it's also very not super similar, but also kind of similar to Cornwell's own life when she has Lucy in the book, which is kind of putting herself in there. And then my last general theme was Cornwell noting at technological advancements, because at the time, the only real clues they had were a more general aspect of DNA. They could, for example, get his blood type, but they couldn't corner exactly who he was with DNA samples. Yeah. And also, they only had the laser light.
I see.
And around 1990, they also only had the ability to be on the crime scene to get the evidence. Whereas present day, for example, we have 3D scanners now, which take every little point of a crime scene to be able to see it even after it's been closed or swept away or something, so that way you don't miss anything.
Exactly. Yeah. It's lovely.
Yeah.
One of the biggest parts of our project is that we're comparing a lot of our works to Poe, which has been really interesting. Would you mind telling me about the connections that you've found to Poe within this book?
Yeah, I actually found that there were a lot, especially because when you look at it closely enough, Cornwell and Poe actually had very similar lives growing up. Yeah. Poe had a lack of a father figure, so did Cornwell. His mom died at an early age. She didn't quite have that, but her mom did kind of mentally abandon her, which is very similar. And they also have the common aspect of both of them writing detective stories, and also having women as being the people that were murdered. Primarily, Cornwell even says in an interview that she agrees with Poe about the thing about how the most poetic thing in the world is the death of a woman. So I connected it to a lot of his detective stories, like The Mystery of Mary Roget, The Murders in the Rue Morgue, The Purloined Letter, although that one was more minor.
Still along that line, though.
Yeah.
And then for our last thing, we also try to connect our works to Virginia and what they say about Virginia today. So tell me, what does this book tell us about Virginia today, or then and then today?
The biggest thing was definitely how Richmond, being a big city and also the capital of Virginia, enhances the idea that Virginia is kind of creepy because a lot of her descriptions in that book made me think of Richmond as this dark, soulless place.
Oh,
so
lovely.
I was like, I never want to see Richmond at night. And also it seems to suggest that crimes typically happen in big cities, because outside of Richmond we also see crimes happening a lot in New York,
This
or
is typically true. Yeah, no.
maybe Seattle.
We just won't visit at night. How about that?
I like that
We'll
plan.
visit during the day.
I like that plan.
I thought when I was reading like that was a big connection I found to Poe, like the treatment of the setting.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that, you know, she's a chief medical examiner.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And a lot of times she's called in to work at very odd hours of night. And she's...
Because that's when the murders are happening.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Because she has to get on the scene as soon as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, so much of the book not only happens at night, but a lot of her fear and, like, anxiety, Scarpetta's anxiety, I feel like is occurring at night.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I relate that very much to Poe.
Right. I also think she kind of highlights the importance of college in Virginia, because Scarpetta goes back to talk to her mentor at UVA. She doesn't leave UVA forever and ever and ever and ever. No, she goes back and she talks to her mentor, and then also the fact that nothing really stays in the dark in Virginia. Like, everyone knows everyone's business.
Oh, yeah.
Because you had the news reporter, Abby Turnbull, who kept writing about everyone and everything in her newspaper, and nothing was kept, like, secret, even though it was supposed to be. And so people were getting mad at Scarpetta and getting mad at the police, and it was a hot mess.
That's also, I feel like, distinctly Southern kind of vibe, where, like, everybody knows everything about it. But yeah. So, Febronia and Professor Hammond got the chance to interview Cornwell herself on Zoom. But before we get into that, every episode on this podcast has a different cover. And this episode's cover is the cover of Libby and Febronia's book, which we all designed and hope that you enjoy. But I thought it would be nice to kind of tell the story of our project in all the different places that we went to and people that we met, by including all the pictures that we took. So here is Febronia.
At this point in your writing career, you've published around 40 books, but you previously worked as a crime reporter for the Charlotte Observer and as a computer analyst and technical writer at the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner in Richmond, Virginia. Could you tell us about how you became a fiction writer, and how did the transition from true crime to fiction writing happen? Have you always wanted to share the stories?
Well, it's a good question. And, when I was a kid, I was always writing, but I never thought about being a writer. I already was one. And there were other things that I would have rather have done in life. I wanted to be a professional tennis player. I wanted to be an archaeologist. I wanted to be a lot of things, but writing just was something that came naturally to me. It's a way of expressing myself. So when I graduated from Davidson, the only thing I knew is that I seemed to do okay as a writer. And so I was suggested I go to the newspaper. And long story short, I ended up becoming their crime reporter. And that's what got interested me in policing and crime. And that's when I saw my first dead body or two at a crime scene. And so I was there for a while doing that. Then I did the biography of Ruth Graham, who was my old friend in Montreat, where I grew up. And after that, I said to myself, what am I going to do now? The only two things I know is I like writing books because I just wrote one, and I'm interested in crime. So I said, I'll put the two together. I'll write books about crime. However, I'd never read a murder mystery in my whole life. I know a lot of people are shocked. They figure I read them. And I did read Nancy Drew a little bit when I was coming really young, but I didn't know anything about murder mysteries. So that is probably key to why my work is so different from most people. My approach was always as a nonfiction writer. And so I only knew how to do that. I knew how to be a journalist. And I think it's also just my nature, that I'm a very nonfiction oriented, fact oriented person. A lot of lawyers in my family and people like that. So maybe that's part of it in the DNA. But after I'd done the Ruth Graham biography, I said, okay, well, I'll put crime and books together. So I started trying to do that. I went out and bought a couple of paperbacks like of Agatha Christie and thought, how do you write a murder mystery? And meanwhile, the biggest thing I didn't understand is what happens to the dead body after it leaves the crime scene. So that got me my first visit to the medical examiner's office at that time in Richmond, Virginia, because my then husband and I had moved there. That was a life changer for me because the minute I went through the morgue with Dr. Fierro, I never viewed anything the same after that. I mean, it was quite a revelation. And to some of what you have asked about in some of your questions, let me just say this. Talk about serendipity, because at that time, Marcella Fierro was one of 10 female forensic pathologists in the country. There just weren't, I'd never even heard of a woman medical examiner when I first was introduced to her. And because but you're talking 1984, way before you even a thought in anybody's head, way back in the Stone Age, that was when I had my first meeting with her. But that's how I ended up at the morgue. I didn't go there. I wasn't already working in a medical examiner's office like a lot of people think. And I said, oh, I'll write crime fiction. Oh, no, no, no. I went there for research. And I just thought I'd hang out there a little bit and then I wouldn't need to do that anymore. And I never thought I'd end up working there for 6 years.
That is really cool. And I love how you got into your fictional writing like that. I think this, you kind of answered it a little already, but maybe you could go into more detail. Did any authors in particular inspire you toward your own interest in writing?
Well, in 1984, I wasn't reading mysteries or anything like that, and one of the most influential books hadn't been written yet, and that was Thomas Harris's Silence of the Lambs. When I read that in the late 80s, it was right around the time that I was starting postmortem. And I was very, very influenced by that book. I still think it's one of the best crime novels ever written. But he writes with a verisimilitude that causes you to completely believe everything he says, even though Hannibal Lecter probably really couldn't quite do what he just did, but you believe it. And that is kind of what I always want to be able to do too. So, but I was not reading crime fiction when I first started writing it, as I said.
Makes sense. I think you do a wonderful job of portraying how the murders happen in postmortem. Just to say, kind of a follow up to that though, would you happen to have a favorite Edgar Allan Poe story or poem? And if so, why do you find it so compelling?
Well, I think Poe is darkly, deeply psychological, and what people think is gothic and horror is really, it's like Kurt said, in the heart of darkness, the horror is us, and what's inside of us. And so all of Poe's work really reflects that. But I like Telltale Heart. And because that, again, is very deeply psychological, and you think you kill somebody and that's the end of them, but you still hear in their heart beating under the floorboard because psychologically now they own you. And that's one thing people don't realize, that whatever you hate and try to destroy owns you. Even if you walk away from it and the other person doesn't, and this is something Poe understood. And what's interesting too is if I've been to Fort Monroe in Virginia, in Hampton, Virginia, and Fort Monroe back in the Civil War, that's where Poe was stationed for a little while. And if you go to that old fort and you can walk where some of the quote dorm rooms, and I can imagine him in that fortress and the wind howling at night, and I said, I bet you that's where he was when he started thinking he heard a heartbeat under those floorboards.
I want to go visit now. I haven't been,
You
but
have to go. It's
it sounds like a
You got to go to Fort Monroe. It's worth it. It's now a bunch of condos, but it's beautiful, and you can see the plaque and all that where Poe was staying. So it's fascinating.
I'm gonna have to add that to my summer to-do list now. Your debut novel, Postmortem, is an unforgettable crime fiction thriller and an important pioneering book in the forensic thriller subgenre. What lessons about crime and the role of forensics in crime solving did you want your readers to take away from the book when you wrote it?
Well, here's the funny thing. When I wrote Postmortem, there was no such thing as a forensic thriller, and nobody else was focusing on that. Even the only one who started flirting with it a good bit was P.D. James, but never to the extent, obviously, that I did. And when I first had that trip to the medical examiner's office and walked into the morgue, it was after hours. It was, I think, it might have been the spring of 1984. I don't remember exactly when it was in 1984, but I remember that Dr. Fierro, we sat down in a conference room for about 3 hours and just talked about everything. And she went through some cases with me. And then on the way out, she showed me the autopsy suite downstairs. Now, by that time, it was empty. All the bodies were gone for the day. It had been mopped and cleaned. And I'm not going to say it smelled good, but it didn't smell as bad as usual. Let's just put it that way. And she showed me the refrigerator, but that was it. And I said to her two things. I said, well, the big thing I said was, what's next? Is there anything new coming down the road? Anything? Because autopsies have been done pretty much the same way, really, going for hundreds of years. So that technology is not new, except that we have X-rays, and of course now we have other scanning methods. But and she said, "Well, yeah." She said, "There's this thing called DNA that's coming, and also we're starting to use lasers to look for stuff on the bodies." And I said, "Ooh, well, I like that." Meanwhile, all the on the upstairs floors were the forensic labs in that building, which is really unusual. I don't know of any other place except Virginia, hooray, Virginia, where the medical examiner's offices and the labs are in the same building. So what happens is the forensic pathologists become like Scarpetta. They know everything about everything. They know about trace evidence. They know about toxicology. They know that this fleck of paint they just dug out of that wound on a hit and run, that microscopically it might tell you the make and model of the car that hit them and how many times it had been painted and maybe even where. And so that was what set me on fire. I mean, it gave me chills because to me this was like an archaeological excavation where you take a piece and a shard and a little bit of something and you reconstruct not only how people died thousands of years ago at that site, but how they lived and what they ate and where their china came from and who their relatives and ancestors might have been. That ultimately is what a crime scene is supposed to tell you. And the biggest crime scene of all is the human body itself. And that is what you deal with in the ME's office. Is that crime scene that is a person and what it might tell you, what layers of civilization are lurking there, right down to old fractures that tell you something about what it was like when that person was coming along, and then the injuries that were just caused by a perpetrator. So I wanted to know about the forensics of all this. I wanted to know about the autopsies. And that is how my work spun into what it is. And it created the forensic genre, which then became CSI and all these other things. But it wasn't something I ever intended. It was just something that happened. Don't you love my short answers?
I love them. They're my favorite part about this. In 1990, Postmortem did even more than pioneer in the forensic thriller genre. Your protagonist, Case Carpetta, offered a new, surprising, and inspiring female hero. How did you conceive of this character?
Well, once again, I wasn't trying to create a hero, except I was creating a hero from myself. See, here's the interesting thing. I was young way back then. I know it's hard to believe, but I really was once upon a time. And so I was much more drawn to a slightly older hero, maybe someone 40-ish, and who was far superior to me in terms of being educated and everything that I wasn't. I mean, I couldn't do science. I mean, I couldn't do math. So I avoided every science course I could because they all had math in them. And it's like the old maid card in the deck. Once that showed up, I knew that was it for me. And so she's everything that I'm not. Dr. Scarpetta is. So I created my own hero, not really thinking so much about someone else's hero. The irony is, if I were creating someone today, it'd be a different hero. It wouldn't be, no offense, Scarpetta, or she might zap me with lightning, but it wouldn't be her. It'd be something else. And probably somebody young, someone because I'm older. You see what I mean? So, but and then of course I was inspired by Dr. Fierro, this brilliant woman forensic pathologist who's Italian and was married to an Italian, both of them about 3 feet tall, both, and she was a chain smoker. I mean, nothing like the Scarpetta in my books. Physically, I don't know who that person is. She's come from wherever she wanted, but intellectually, I was inspired by Marcella, and I followed her around like for 6 years. I scribed when she was doing autopsies every morning. I went to court with her. I went to a lot of her lectures. Um, whatever she would let me do, I would go do it to learn how she thought. And that is how I learned what Scarpetta would be like, was by following Marcella around. But that doesn't mean, here's the funny thing about fiction. If you do it right, you don't really know where things come from. That's what I believe. I believe you don't know where things come from. We channel something like an electrical conductor. And if you're open to it, then creative things will happen, and stories that want to be told will be told, and characters that want to come forth will come forth. And so I always say to others and to my own self, don't know up front what you're going to do. Let it keep looking for something until it finds you. Because there's, I think the saddest thing in the world is a story that wants to be told that isn't.
I love hearing that just because I'm actually someone who wants to write my own fiction novel. So that's really nice to hear. Um, I know you mentioned Scarpetta was more of a hero for yourself at the time when you wrote her, but did you have any thoughts about how readers would react to her?
No, I really didn't. And I was stunned at first there was a lot of anger and hostility towards this character. I remember one book reviewer in London, I heard when he finished postmortem, he literally threw it across the room. And I thought, wow, that's pretty good. If I can get someone to throw the book across the room, I've done my job right, haven't I? And the reason he did that is because it was reflecting the way real crimes really work, and it wasn't a whodunit. It wasn't the butler who did it, so he felt cheated out of his little tidied bow that gets tied at the end of a conventional murder mystery. And also this woman forensic pathologist. I had a bookstore manager in Richmond, who, after he read postmortem, he went through and he changed all the pronouns to he to see if he could tolerate the book better if he thought of Scarpetta as a man. And he said, well, that didn't work very well. And I said, yeah, probably not. And I said, why does it bother you so much? He said, I don't want to think of a woman down there in that room with those bodies. And I said, but why wouldn't you? Most of the people who are in there are women. They should have a woman looking after them. It's not, I mean, men get raped and murdered too, but there's a lot more women that are murdered than men. And those kinds of situations, as opposed to, drug deals gone bad and the bang bangs on the street. But, the most awful cases that I saw when I was at the morgue were the victims were women, almost all of it, or children, females. Um, you know, and you can't see stuff like that and walk away and not be changed by it. And in my mind, Scarpetta then went from being a role model that I might have because she was smarter than me, to a crusader that I wanted to be, because I was so offended by what I saw in that room below the first floor of that building, the cases that went on in there, and the idea that you could come home from a night school class and not know that someone's hiding in your apartment because the person worked maintenance and had a key. And then that's and that and that's the real case I'm thinking of, and that body coming in and what that looked like. And somebody just like me who went to William and Mary, like Shenandoah, like Davidson, you know, and ends up bound with all these different colored pairs of pantyhose that were dug out of her drawer, and she's kept alive all night long and abused and then murdered. And her parents found her in the morning when they were supposed to pick her up for a trip. And you see things like that, and I'm thinking, and you wonder why I would want a woman to be the one who handles some of this? Are you kidding me? You better watch out. You get an angry woman on the warpath who's going after that kind of stuff. Now we're talking.
Yeah. Um, what qualities made Kay different from preceding female protagonists in crime fiction?
First of all, she knows what she's doing and she's put her hands in the bodies and she understands evidence. I mean, truthfully, um, and I don't say this to brag, but you won't find much a better detective. If there's, and I'm talking real life, if there was a real case to be solved and Scarpetta walked in the room, I'd bet money on her figuring it out. Um, because she knows what she's doing. It's not just deductive and um, not any fault of that. And by the way, if Agatha Christie were still writing today with her appreciation of science and fact, she would do very similar things to what I've done. She went on archaeology digs. Her daughter did all her scientific research so that, and Agatha worked as a pharmacist for a while, so she knew poisons. So when she's talking about sparkling cyanide, she knew what she's talking about. So there are, P.D. James knew a lot of what she's talking about too. So it's a matter of doing research. You don't have to be a forensic pathologist to write about one. And that's the beauty of being a writer. It's like being an actor. There's no requirement that you were a rocket scientist first. All that's required is that you're an artist. And an artist can take on the persona of anyone and make you believe it as long as you do your homework. And that's what I'd say to you. If you want to be a writer and you want to write fiction, you go research it as if it's fact and see what surprises you. The real gift in all of this is curiosity. And as an artist, we want something that makes us curious. It's that thing where you go, I know I shouldn't look, but I've got to just pull up that sheet just a little bit and see, you know? And that's where we get our emotions from. That's where we get our stories, is follow what makes you curious, even if it's morbid or if it's beautiful or if it's dragons. I don't care what it is. And besides, who said it's not real? Who said? We're not so sure, are we? Who knows what's real and what isn't real? I mean, he'll get in the last word. You just watch. And you know from being around Winchester, he's out there somewhere.
Hmm. I know you said that originally she received a lot of hate, Scarfetta did, for being a woman, but later on, were you surprised by the positive feedback she started to receive?
Yes, I mean, what's really been nice is that there have been a lot of people that have gone into related professions because they're inspired by her. People who decided to become a forensic pathologist or even became an FBI agent or all kinds of things. And whenever I hear those stories, if I think I've inspired somebody to be curious about something and pursue it, then I feel like I've done my job because art is not supposed to be self-indulgent. While it may feel that way, it is, first of all, it's not when you're really doing it because you have to structure and build like an engineer. But but it's also meant to be a gift to other people. We are the voices that most people don't have. People, just like a musician can play a song that people love, but most people can't do the same thing they do. Well, the artist that's a storyteller is a gift and a gifted person. And what we do is not only for ourselves, but it's for everyone. And not that you want it to be didactic and to lecture people, but you want to inspire. And if something has made you curious and made you like the world better or enjoy it or find it more interesting to be in, then that's something to share. And I find solving crimes, basically answering questions and solving mysteries, and the who, what, done, how and why, and what this little piece of that meant and why that got left over there. I don't know. I find that very gratifying. I think a lot of people do.
I agree. Um, Also adding on to the fact that you said that a lot of people were initially mad at her, did that also cause any pushback from the readers or critics because they were uncomfortable about her intelligence and her independent spirit?
No, I haven't heard that, but probably the ones who would get PO'd about it aren't gonna, I'm not gonna hear from them anyway, you know. But no, truth is, mostly she's been incredibly celebrated. And, from the get-go, going all the way back to the very beginning, there were all sorts of actresses that wanted to play her, um, because she was an unusual character and a powerful woman and a strong woman. And so, and the fact that there hasn't been anything like that until even recently is not for a lack of trying. It's just that it always failed in the writing stage. And that should be a reminder to everybody who might hear this of how important writing is. There are no movies, there's no TV shows, there's nothing without the story, not a Broadway musical, nothing. We storytellers, we oftentimes we may not get the credit that we would like, but we inspire all kinds of things that happen out there. People get ideas from your stories, and next thing you know, they're writing something of their own, or maybe they're creating a piece of music that is inspired by your words, even though what you've written isn't music. Uh, that is what's fun about all this. Are you still, is everybody still there?
And my last one for that,
Okay.
yes. The last question for like that group of six Scarpetta questions is what should contemporary readers learn about female workplace experiences of the 1990s when they read this book?
Well, I think the biggest thing is that nothing changes. Nothing really changes. I mean, a woman in the workplace has a lot of challenges. I'd like to say, I've tried never to focus on that. I never think of myself, oh, I'm a woman in the workplace and I'm just looking for someone to not treat me right. I've never done that. I don't want to do that. But it's a fact that if you're a female, you put up with some things that maybe not everybody else does. And but truth is, it's hard being anybody in the workplace. It's not just men versus women, but here's another sad fact. Women don't stick together. They don't stick up for each other oftentimes. Women can be so competitive with each other in the workplace, and instead of doing teamwork and making everything better, they actually try to take away from what someone's doing. And I, whether it's male versus female or women and women and men, whatever it is, there is no place for jealousy. And you shouldn't be competitive. Art is not competitive. It should not be competitive. I say that knowing that I'm secretly jealous of J.K. Rowling. But you know what? The best way to do that is to admit it and say, hell yeah, I wish I'd sold as many books as she has. I wish I had a Harry Potter series, something that huge that's everywhere. But instead of being competitive, just be glad, say, hey, that's cool. That's cool. It's not what I do. And there's no point in being competitive with it. I learned that a long time ago because I was always hanging out with somebody that was bigger than I was, whether it was Tom Clancy or an actress that was better, really well known. And there's just no point in being jealous. Just do the best you can do. As we say in helicopter flying, just fly the helicopter. Just do it and you won't crash, hopefully. Don't be looking around at what the other
Hopefully.
helicopter pilots are doing.
That's a sure way to crash.
Yeah.
Moving on to the setting, Postmortem is set in Richmond, Virginia, Virginia State Capitol, and the book seems to offer a historic snapshot for its readers. Your setting descriptions, especially those related to the natural world, are delightfully vivid and really help the reader to enter the world that you are creating. When writing this book, were you really pulling from your own experiences living there, And what did you like best about living in Richmond?
Well, you've got to remember that, yes, I was not only living in Richmond, but I was working in the medical examiner's office in Richmond. So when those serial murders called the Southside Stranglings began in 1987, I was still working at the medical examiner's office. So when I began to write postmortem later, or I think like early that following year. I mean, I would do it after hours. I wasn't, of course, doing that while I was at work, but I would get home and I'd stay up till about midnight trying to write yet another novel that because I'd written three so far that nobody wanted at that time. But what I was talking about in that book is what I saw in that world I was living in. And and that's what I mean about the nonfiction influence. I mean, I was riding with the homicide detectives every weekend, and we were stopping and looking at the houses with the lights out where some of these victims had been murdered. And so I try, what you're reading in there is me telling you a story from my own experiences, really. And that's the thing that's fun about fiction. Fiction can be true even though it's not, if you see what I mean. But you're capturing something that's real, even if you're making up the story. So yes, Richmond was important to that. Place is a character.
Hmm. The other book in our studies chronologically follow postmortem, and some of them comment on the changing landscape of Virginia, especially in Appalachia. Your own 1996 book, in fact, features the threat of an ecological disaster where terrorists seek to sabotage a nuclear power plant. Do you foresee ecological concerns appearing more in crime novels in the future?
Well, I will think anything that can be weaponized, absolutely anything. You're going to see it being used in crime fiction and stuff, or movies or anything. I think what's the irony is when I was doing that research for cause of death that you're talking about, how open the society was back then that a nuclear power plant would even let me come in there and say, hey, if terrorists took this over, how would they do it? So I mean, nobody would let you do things like that anymore. But I was very lucky I got to do a lot of stuff that you just wouldn't get access to now. But you also have AI and the internet, and there's a lot you can figure out on your own. Don't ever let that take the place of doing something for real if you can. Because as you know, you can look at the internet and see pictures of something, but then if you go see it yourself, it moves you in a different sort of way.
I I agree 100%. Personally, not a huge fan of AI. So, we've also noticed that almost every book in our study of Virginia mysteries features or references troubled families or intergenerational trauma. In postmortem, we find Kay's support of her niece, Lucy, inspiring because she has a very absentee mother. What would you like readers to think about or learn as they follow the dynamic relationships between Kay and her sister, as well as Kay and her niece in this book and in the Kay Scarpetta novels that follow it?
Well, family is important, whether it is your real family or your chosen family. And nobody can be alone. We need each other. And that's, it's not just up to quote the government to take care of people when they're going through hard times. I mean, we should be doing that as friends and family, that we should all be looking after each other as best we can. We really should. And I think that's one thing that's changed a lot. That was when I was growing up, that whether you liked your neighbors or not, they did look after you. If you were sick or you got hurt, and yeah, they tattled on you and they ratted you out and they did everything else and looked down their nose at you if they didn't like what you were doing, but they weren't going to throw you out to the wolves either. Um, these days, people don't do as much of that as they used to. They're not, I think people are more afraid of each other. They don't know each other. We live in ever since COVID, that's gotten so much worse. And one thing that I would like people to get out of all of this is that we need each other and pay attention to who's in front of you and who's around you. And if you can be kind, you should. And if you need to get your shotgun out, you can do that too, depending on who that neighbor is.
Lovely message. We were delighted that you published your memoir, True Crime, a Memoir, earlier this year. However, learning about some of your challenges, especially in childhood experiences with your biological and foster parents, was disheartening. What was it like to write about such difficult and private experiences?
Well, it's not easy to do that, and I never thought I was going to, and then I did. And that's the funny thing again about art. It sometimes decides for you what you're going to do, and you have to listen to that. Um, just if you follow your instincts and always wonder why, and that happened for me because I had finished my last Scarpetta book unbelievably early, like 4 months early. And I said to myself, this must have happened for a reason. I wonder why, because this is just really bizarre that this has happened. And then I was going to write an autobiographical treatment for a possible TV thing. And next thing I knew, I thought, I'm just going to try to write my story myself. I'm not going to just do a treatment. And it wanted to be told. That doesn't mean it was easy. It was rather depressing the whole time I was doing it. It was not a joyful thing where I'd go zippity doo dah on home at the end of the day when I'd leave my office. It was gravity was turned up very high while I was working on that. I'm talking about people, many of whom are dead now, and then I was resurrecting experiences, looking at notes that I've not looked at in 50 years, and then remembering things that happened now. And that's a good example of if you keep a record of things, how helpful it can be later in life. Because I never could have reconstructed all that if I hadn't had journals and written a bunch of stuff long, long ago. But again, stories, we can't live without stories. Stories are how we figure out who we are and what we're supposed to do about it, and even maybe why we're here. And we don't know how to navigate this planet without stories. And so I thought it was important to tell mine because people have talked about me for a long time. And I thought, okay, well, I'll show you who I really am. And in doing so, it should also inspire you that failure isn't necessarily the final judgment, or I wouldn't be here because I've had plenty of it. And furthermore, you'll never be anything if you're not willing to be bad at something. That's just how it works. You're not never going to write a good sentence till you've written so many bad ones you can't even count it anymore. And I still do. I still do. So that's why I wanted to do that, is to say, hey, join the club. We've all screwed up. We all have unhappy memories. And here's the funny thing, if you're a storyteller, even bad stories are a gift. They're a gift. My foster home situations when I was a little kid, the psychiatric hospital that was like one flew over the cuckoo's nest. I mean, that's great stuff. It wasn't fun when I was living it, but I'm very glad I have those stories to tell because they're good stories. So use them. Use your stories.
Message. I'm glad that they didn't stop you from being a writer. Speaking of the foster care that you were in, though, what would you like readers to know about the foster care system within our country?
Well, first of all, I was very lucky that I wasn't in the government type foster care. I was in foster care where it was a family that volunteered to take us in. It was unfortunate that it was not a pleasant experience, but I wasn't in the system. And that's a problem because when people get in the system, sometimes they never get out of it. And my mother was in the system when she was an orphan, and I suspect that she was very damaged by it. So I think that the biggest thing that I would say is, yes, these are necessary things that have to happen if somebody has got nowhere else to go. But again, the importance of neighbors, of people who look after each other. And we can't always do everything that somebody might need, but whether you're religious or not, one of the things I think is great about church is it creates a community. And in my church, when I was growing up, it looked after people. I mean, that's where that foster family came from. They were members of my church. And for better or for worse, even if you don't it's not a pleasant experience. If you've got people in a community that are looking after each other, much better things are going to happen than if they just go off and or end up in the care of strangers and you don't even know who these people are or what their intentions are.
This year has been eventful, and we appreciate that you've been taking the time to talk with us today. I especially appreciate it because I really did enjoy reading your book. So it's kind of like a new fan just to meet big time author for me. Um, but not only have you published your memoir, but also you published many other books, and you have Kay Scarpetta now on screen. What is it like to see your stories, Postmortem and Autopsy, adapted from fiction to drama?
Well, I'm very honored and pleased that it finally happened, and you couldn't ask for a more stellar cast. And of course, I love the idea of Nicole Kidman playing Scarpetta, and she's and a really nice person. I like her. Um, Off screen as well. I mean, she's just, if you meet her, she makes you feel good. She's a kind person. Um, but to be really honest about it, what you have to also steel yourself for is when your work is adapted by other artists, whether it's actors or screenwriters or producers or directors or cinematographers or costume designers, they're going to do their own creative thing with it. And so you have to be ready for the fact that it's not going to look exactly like what you made, what you did, and be ready for that. And but I tend to, listen, my thought is there's no anything that makes something good or better, I'm all for it. Just don't make it worse. Please don't do that. And so I don't mind if people change stuff as long as it works and it's good and it's fun. Um, but but it's definitely, I'm still trying to figure out uh, what this new experience is doing for me because it's still pretty recent. That show just came out in March. And they've just finished filming for season 2, so we'll see what everybody thinks about that next year. So, well, but I'm very pleased. I'm glad it's happened. And my biggest thing is I just hope people are enjoying it.
Haven't watched it yet, but I'm excited to watch it myself.
Well, I hope
Um,
you'll have fun with it.
Thank you. Would you like to see any of your other stories or characters taken to the screen?
Absolutely. I'd like all of it to go to the screen. Why not? I mean, listen, I want everything turned into everything. I'd love to see a Scarpetta musical, and I'm not kidding. Every time I say that, people laugh, and I go, no, why not? If you've ever heard the sounds in the morgue, I mean, Sweeney Todd, come on now. There is music even in some of the ugliest things imaginable. The water drumming in a sink and the clinking of steel in the wheel and the thing banging into a steel door, boom, 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 boom. And then comes the strings. Now, I'm not a musician, but uh, I think I don't say no to anything. I'd love to see other adaptations of Scarpetta stories.
Febronia and Hammond also got the chance to speak with Dr. Marilyn Miller, so here they are.
So, how did a chemistry major get involved in science, involved with law? Well, I was going to be a doctor, a physician. And I discovered one thing: I don't like sick people. And so I figured I needed to do something a little bit different. And in undergrad, I was very active in our American Chemical Society student affiliate group. That was at Florida Southern College. And one of the newsletters that came out while I was a senior a million years ago um, was an article about someone who was working in a crime lab, which we now call forensic science labs or forensic labs. And I was taken by that. And this particular person had gone to the University of Pittsburgh for a master's degree in forensic chemistry. And so I looked into it and At the same time, I was still going through all the steps for medical school, but not really feeling all that great about it. And just happened to get involved in going to that graduate program. Now, that particular program at the University of Pittsburgh also works with the Pittsburgh Allegheny County Crime Lab. As a matter of fact, most of the instructors in our graduate program worked at the lab. And in the late 70s, that was the model for most forensic science programs, is that you had your academic programs at a college or university, and then you would apply those in a forensic lab setting. At that time, there were only about 7 schools in the country that had any kind of a graduate program in anything relating to forensic science. And so I was lucky and finished my master's there. And then I just had to find a job. And so I found a lab to work in. And one of the things in that forensic laboratory, which coincidentally was also in Pittsburgh, the city of Pittsburgh, was the fact that you had to rotate through as a science advisor for the police department's crime scene investigators. And so that's how I got involved in crime scene investigation. It was part of, if you're the scientist analyzing the evidence, it certainly helps you do your job better if you can go to the scene and see the scene as well. And that's the attitude that I carried with me throughout any of my subsequent professional life as an active forensic scientist before I started in the academic world. So that I didn't intend to be a crime scene investigator, but it turned out it was pretty cool.
Glad to hear it. What was your day-to-day job like, such as when you worked in forensic labs in Florida?
In those labs, they were affiliated with local law enforcement agencies, sheriff's departments, which in Florida are their regular police departments. In some places, especially here in Virginia, when you say sheriff's department, they usually are affiliated with jails or prisons. But in Florida, sheriff's departments are full investigative agencies. And I was doing full service, I guess is what you could say. I was analyzing samples of cocaine and then also analyzing bloodstains or gunshot residue. So it was at that time a full service laboratory. So I got lots and lots and lots of exposure to all sorts of different types of evidence. Unfortunately, that type of forensic laboratory is probably a dinosaur. Most forensic laboratories have very segmented, compartmentalized units, where if it's biological, it goes, to the biology section. If it's gunshot residue, it would go to the firearms section, and sometimes even instrumental analysis. The drugs are handled by a drug analysis unit. So it's you don't find those full service labs. You have very department oriented units in most forensic laboratories, whether they be local or even in some cases the state, and then of course the federal labs.
Cool. Your academic achievements also include a doctorate in education leadership, and you're a revered professor emeritus of the Department of Forensic Science at Virginia Commonwealth University. How did those early laboratory experiences in Florida affect your work in the classroom as you trained future generations of leading scientists?
I will probably say this incorrectly, but there's an old saying is that those that can do, those that can't teach. Well, except forensic science is the exact opposite. It's getting the practical experience of, this is what it's like to go to a gory crime scene. Here's the kind of evidence you're going to find, at a stabbing or a shooting or a beating or something. And then here's how you collect that evidence, and here's how you go to the lab and you test it. And as my graduate school experience showed, it's much better to get the sound academic, schooling as well as the practical work and experience as well. And so the old saying for me is backwards, them's that do it and then teach others how to do it. And so all of my experience, 14 years worth of doing crime scene work and then analyzing the evidence, absolutely affected how I learned to teach. And that's why I went ahead and got my doctorate in education, because I needed to know more about how to be a good teacher. Um, I know I was a good forensic scientist, but I also needed to know better about how best to pass on that knowledge to my students. I was lucky enough to have been a part-time adjunct professor teaching, of all things, organic chemistry as I was still working in the forensic lab. So I had a little bit of a background in how to teach and how to relate to students, but nothing to do with forensic science until I started working at the University of New Haven in Connecticut.
I'm glad to hear. As a future teacher, I'm glad to hear that you took the measures to ensure that you could teach your students properly.
Thank you, because I really, really thought about that. I could have gone along and just, been a, an instructor, non-tenure track person at all of the institutions where I taught, both at the University of New Haven and at VCU. But I wanted to do more because I wanted to do a better job. Plus, I was really interested in research and how best to show that here is the basis for what I can testify about in court, or here's the basis in my research that shows you how you can make this conclusion about something that you've analyzed. So I found that very useful, especially in higher ed.
What forensic technology or philosophy do you believe works best when trying to solve a crime scene? And what tools or outlooks help a forensic scientist to her job most effectively and accurately?
Well, my motto, my mantra, my basic tenet of forensic science for me has always been it's all in the details. And it can be something as small as a grain of poison, or it can be something as large as a ton of marijuana or something. Um, and until you don't pay, in other words, you have to pay attention to the details, because within that small, even that small amount of information, you can oftentimes solve a case. I remember working a homicide case where I found a button at the crime scene, and it just happened to match the button that was taken off, or a shirt that was taken off a suspect. It matched. So something as small as a button can solve a case. And in some cases, that's what we would call physical evidence that helps with the details. But I remember working a crime scene in Florida one time where the victim's wife just happened to be in my vicinity as I was working the crime scene. And I hear her say, "Oh, they took my thimbles." She had a thimble collection, and whoever had killed her husband also stole these valuable thimbles. And nobody else heard it. And then a couple weeks later, when we developed a suspect, guess what was in their possession? A collection of thimbles. Now, if I had not paid attention to that small detail, who knows? There's just another piece of evidence that gets linked from the crime scene to the suspect. So it's all in the details.
That's cool and really important to know.
Yeah, well, it is. I mean, and that's what forensic science is all about, finding all of the details. I mean, even a crime scene investigator, yeah, you go and, let's say it's a shooting. Sure, you look for a gun, you look for a bullet, you look for a casing, you look for GSR, but sometimes it can be a bloody footwear impression that makes a case. Um, You have to be, number one, open and objective and pay attention to the small things. And so that's how I developed that little mantra that I have.
Do you believe forensic scientists and experts also have to have the mindset of a detective? And what are the similarities and differences in these roles, and where and how do they overlap?
Well, it's interesting, the way you've asked that question because it's a bit of a battle that I've fought for a good number of years. Historically, crime scenes are investigated by police officers. And these are police officers who oftentimes will have a preconceived idea as to what's going to be at a crime scene. Whereas if you get a scientist who goes to a crime scene, they're going to keep that scientific open mind. They're starting that scientific method where you observe phenomenon, you reach conclusions about it, and test it. And so one of the things that I have always wanted to do and have succeeded in some levels. In some levels, I'm still fighting the battle. You need to have every crime scene investigated by a scientifically trained individual who is not necessarily a police officer. Police officers have their own set way of thinking, whereas a scientist has the other way of thinking. Do they need to work together? Oh, you bet. Absolutely. But, training a person who's been out on road patrol, patrolling, the streets as a police officer, or even as a detective, interrogating people, working with suspects or witnesses, that gets them a little bit of a blinder. Whereas a scientist goes in and keeps that open mind. Now, the scientist finds the evidence. They can't just keep it to themselves. They have to share it with the police, the agency that they're working with. So, as much as I would like to say that every crime scene unit in the country has scientists working their crime scene, they don't. A lot of agencies train the police officer in a limited amount of scientific application. It works and sometimes it doesn't work.
So the role of women in forensic science has developed since the late 1900s, where it was very less likely for a woman to be in a forensic science role. How have you seen the role of women in forensic science grow or change since the 1990s?
Um, well, I would say even before 1990s, when I was working in a forensic lab, it was about 50-50 men and women. And this would be in, the early 80s. And it has slowly changed into a lot of women. A vast majority of the scientists working in forensic labs are women. If you think about it, it's pretty steady at work. It's usually a government agency that's paying you. They're pretty good about, taking time off to have kids. And come on, women are detail oriented. We're not big picture. Let's go shoot, bang, bang. Let's chase somebody down an alley or something. We're more about give me the nitty gritty. Let me work through it. And I know that sounds very sexist, but come on. We want to have good, steady employment. We want to be able to take time for our families, and we really like getting into the weeds of things, the details.
I agree. So, like the character Kay Scarpetta, you worked and came up through in a field that was at least maybe pre 1980s, 1990s was traditionally dominated by male colleagues. What was it like in your real life experience aside from the 50-50 that you mentioned?
Well, early on in my career, I had to stick up for myself, much the way Kay Scarpetta sticks up for herself. Now, the medical examiner is a little bit different than a forensic scientist. They've gone through medical school, they've gone through residency and all that, and then forensic pathologists have fellowships that they have to go through as well, which is a little bit different than, say, the forensic scientist coming out of grad school and going right into a lab. But my biggest hurdles were at the crime scene when I was dealing with very male-oriented police officers. There was more than one occasion when I had to tell the police officers to get off the crime scene, that they were destroying evidence by being there. They didn't necessarily like that. And some days, to be honest with you, I was more diplomatic than others. If it's a quadruple homicide and I've got detectives chomping all over the evidence, I'm going to say to them, get off the crime scene. Um, so after a while, they finally figured out I knew what I was talking about. I didn't necessarily have to stomp my feet and hold my breath or whatever. I just did my job well. And that's how you can get the respect of everybody involved, is by doing your job well.
Glad to hear it got better.
Huh?
I'm glad to hear it got better.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Did you have any female role models or male mentors who made a particular impact on your life or perspectives as a crime scene investigator or educator?
Uh, well, we all have our favorite teachers growing up. And we all have our favorite teachers at both, before college and after college. Um, Unfortunately, I did not have a lot of mentors within the professional field of forensic science, and maybe because it was so long ago and there just weren't that many folks doing it. So of course, the good part for me, the lucky part for me was that most of the people that I respected and I would call a mentor were women scientists. And I had several of them at various stages in my career, at going to school. And subsequently, I just tried to learn from everybody. I would watch everybody, male or female, purple or green. I would just try and observe and watch everyone. And then, try and apply that to my personality.
Um, do you think it's easier to identify criminals and victims thanks to the development of forensics? And what makes it so much easier, harder, or the same?
Well, in 1950s, when everybody was using fingerprints to identify everybody, we all thought, "Yay, we have it made." Well, you have to have the unknown fingerprint that you have to compare to the known fingerprint. Well, if the unknown one is not very good quality, you're never going to match it to anybody. And then you have to have the ones to match it to. You have to have basically a database, a Google of the fingerprints so that you can search it. So that eventually has evolved into something like a Google search of database of fingerprints. It's called IAFIS, Automated Fingerprint Identification System, which is kind of like an artificial intelligent search. But even then, it still has to be verified by a live human being. Of course, when I first started in the business of blood identification, we had ABO. That was it. And then we gradually came up with more genetic markers that helped us identify a profile of a blood sample. But it never individualized the sample. It only grouped it in, it classed it in a possibility. And the value of that sort of stuff at the time was exclusionary. If it didn't match, then you knew somebody was not a suspect. If it was of the same profile, it included them, but it never individualized the person. And then along comes DNA. And in the early 90s, when we first heard use of DNA as a means for identification, it still was very rudimentary. It was not fancy dancy. Here's all of, the base pairs of the DNA molecule. It's gotten close to that now. Um, and then you throw on top of that genealogy DNA analysis, where you can identify a sample and say, well, here's what the family of this suspect, looks like. So DNA, there's a famous judge who's quoted as saying that, DNA changed our criminal justice system. And it has, because it has identified people who need to be held responsible, but it also exonerated people who may have been convicted before and now are innocent. So DNA is, the great thing that we have.
That is cool. That's actually also something I think Cornwell mentions in her book. So it's nice to hear that reflected in real life.
Well, we'll talk about postmortem and Patricia Cornwell in a few minutes, I suspect.
In some other interviews, you mentioned the positive impact of the CSI effect for improving jury attention to the facts of science. Do you think this respect for forensic science has continued or will continue beyond the longevity of those TV shows?
Well, it already has. All the CSIs are gone from television. I guess some other shows we used to call them cable TV shows. Now everything's cable. But I think that it has extended into everybody's body of knowledge. In other words, if let's say you get subpoenaed to go be a juror and you're part of a jury pool and you're sitting there and you're listening to a case. Let's say you get picked for the jury and you're sitting listening to a case and there's blood. Don't you think you're going to want to know what the DNA results were?
Mhm.
I think now everybody has gotten it because of the shows like CSI, or reading the books, the true crime books, or the fiction books. They get the idea. It wasn't like when O.J. Simpson's trial was on TV. Yeah, it was the first time where we got a little bit of exposure to the value and the limitations of DNA. And since then, it has just grown and grown and grown. The O.J. Simpson case was extremely popular and everybody was watching it. When the verdict came out, you probably weren't even born yet, but um, it was it was the beginning. And I think that the CSI shows and some of the other shows, and even this mini series with Kay Scarpetta, are adding to the body of knowledge of the public. And I think that's a good thing. The reason I said I think that it helped me get jury attention when I first started in this business, and I would go to court testify. The jurors would be sitting back and they'd be bored to tears. Oh, here's one of those geeky science people talking about it. Then OJ happened and CSI happened, and I can literally watch jurors sit more forward in their chairs to listen to me testify. So to me, it is a good thing. And a lot of my colleagues in the world of forensic science think it was a bad thing because it made it sound like every case is solvable because of forensic science. Well, it's not, but there are enough of them that they want to hear it. So that's why I have the belief that it had a positive effect.
And then, what are some key points that you shared with students as they learned about victimology? And do you feel that these lessons reflect in forensic thriller novels and films?
Well, I think the thing that I tried to get across to my students is that they need to maintain their science base. They are not there to advocate for the state or the prosecution. They're not there to advocate for a defense attorney. They are there to advocate for the evidence and how the evidence is interpreted based on a science background, not some socioeconomic or victimology sort of interpretation. They are there to talk about what the science shows. If they can't do that, they're not scientists anymore, and they really shouldn't be doing this sort of work. And sadly, a lot of experts that get called in from the outside to re-examine cases, they forget that. They forget that they are there to advocate for the evidence, not one side or the other.
Okay. And now we've reached the part that you were expecting. In the groundbreaking forensic thriller Postmortem, the chief medical examiner is responsible for figuring out the details regarding multiple murders. In speaking with author Patricia Cornwell recently, we learned that the office locations in Richmond in real life actually facilitated the CME's ability to contribute to solving the crimes. However, Virginia is a big state. What should people know about how the system is organized and structured throughout the state, including resources and protocols for rural areas such as Appalachia, where some of the novels in our study are set?
Okay, first thing we need to establish the fact that here in Virginia, the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner is a totally separate entity from the Department of Forensic Science. The Chief Medical Examiner and their office, they are their own bosses. They have their own organization. They have various assistant medical examiners in various locations in the state. Whereas the Department of Forensic Science, its own separate entity in Virginia, has some regional state labs, but there are also some larger cities and municipalities that have some limited forensic science. For instance, the city of Richmond has a forensic unit, but it doesn't really do any real scientific testing. What they do is very basic, fundamental things. They may process evidence and send results to the state lab, but in the state of Virginia, they rely on the state crime lab system, Department of Forensic Science, in order to get most of their evidence analyzed. Other parts of the country have smaller municipalities that have their own smaller labs, much like the Sheriff's Department labs that I worked in early in my career. And that's only because many of the state laboratories are very backlogged. They're very busy, and so it takes a while to get results. Now, some small municipality law enforcement agencies can also send their evidence to the FBI laboratory if they wish, which is the next level up, a federal lab. They're all doing the same sort of testing. It just depends on where the municipality wants to send their evidence. Kay Scarpetta and that character, remember, she is fictional, even though she may be based on real people. Very few medical examiners get as involved in investigations the way she does. That's not to say that a medical examiner won't contribute to an investigation. I have done a lot of bloodstain pattern analysis work, and I absolutely need to know all the details of the wounds on the body. And the only person who can do that for me is the medical examiner. The wound dynamics become very important to my work with the bloodstain patterns, whereas the ME would never do the bloodstain pattern analysis work. They would only do the autopsy and the wound dynamic information. So this is one area where Kay Scarpetta is a little bit beyond real. There are very few medical examiners that get into the nitty-gritty investigation the way that she does. But it makes for entertaining book to read or a movie to watch on Netflix or Prime or whatever it's on.
I agree. Speaking of Miss Patricia Cornwell, she did also mention that some high-profile cases, such as the South Side Strangler, which is actually what her first book was based on, unraveled during her own time in Richmond.
Mhm.
And previously, you mentioned having an anecdote related to the author's life and work. Would you share more about that connection with us?
Sure. Before I do, many of Cornwell's novels have a foundation in real cases. There was one of her books, and I'm sorry, I don't remember which one it is, mimicked an actual case in North Carolina, so much so that there was some litigation involved in that. Patricia Cornwell learned early on that it's good to take some real life cases and write your books based on them if you change some of the details and stuff, which is fine. The books are very entertaining. Um, my involvement with a case, Scarpetta case, um, specifically the one that's in Postmortem, the very first book she wrote, which won a lot of awards, which is great because it was interesting, um, is kind of the reverse. It's a case where a guy, an average citizen, used one of her books for the basis of a homicide case that he carried out. And I'll start over. A woman's body was found. The body had been tied up with certain unique ligatures, knots, and the body dumped in a certain part of town. And we just we worked the crime scene with the body, and I noticed and made mention to the medical examiner in this town about documenting the knots, that they appeared very unique and they needed to be recorded. And about a week or so after the body was found, a certain individual was developed as a suspect. And he was somebody who had a history of being a peeping Tom, going around and looking in the windows of various women in his neighborhood. And it just so happened that the victim of this homicide was his next door neighbor. And so when they started to investigate him as a suspect in the murder of this woman, we of course got a search warrant. And we went into his house, and some of the drapery cords were missing. And drapery cords just happened to be used to tie the knots, the ligatures on her body. Her body had all these little puffs of fabric, like if you have a new carpet and you rub on the carpet, the transfer of the fibers forms these little balls. And she had several of those on her body. He had a carpet that was the same color. And as we were conducting further steps in this search warrant, this man had one book in his house, Postmortem by Patricia Cornwell. And so what I ended up doing on this particular case was I read her book. I had never heard of her. I didn't make any Patricia who. So I read it. And sure enough, in the book, it talks about ligatures and fiber evidence and other trace evidence that linked the victim's body to a certain individual, in this case, a house. So when they got ready, they charged the guy. They charged him with first-degree murder, and this happened in Florida, and he was up for the death penalty. One of the people that was listed on the witness list as we got ready for trial was Patricia Cornwell. because she was going to testify about how the situation in her book matched the way this body was dealt with because this guy had this book in his house. So it was just another type of linking evidence. Darn, they plea bargained it down to life in prison, and I never ever got to meet her because I wanted to meet her and talk to her about her book and how the evidence in her book matched the evidence at this scene. So never got to do it. So that's my Patricia Cornwell story.
Maybe one day you guys can meet up.
Well, she's far more important than I am, I assure you.
I wouldn't put you down like that.
It's just, and it happened a long time ago now. I actually still have some of my old case books, and I was looking through them a couple weeks ago and found this case, and it made me laugh out loud that she's still a big, huge success. And even, did you notice she had a cameo in the show on the TV?
I did not.
Yeah, it's in the very first episode. She's the judge that swears in the character's Case Scarpetta at the very beginning of that first episode. She's the judge in that. That's her cameo. So go back and rewatch it.
Well, okay, second to last question.
Okay.
Enjoyed an impressive career as both a forensic scientist and as an educator. Is there any experience that seems most memorable or satisfying to you?
I have many. I am so proud of all the students that I had a chance to work with and teach. There have been a lot of them, but there are also some that kind of float to the top. And I have, as I say, many of them, but one of my top students that makes me feel so good about the job that I did is someone who is now the assistant director of the Massachusetts State Police Crime Laboratory. And that's a really prestigious position. But the other thing that she has done that I'm oh so proud of is that she doesn't just stay in the lab. She's also contributing to the body of knowledge in forensic science. She's very active in the American Academy of Forensic Science. She is, running workshops. She is what we all should aspire to do using our knowledge. It's not just keeping it in the classroom, it's going beyond the classroom. And if she ever happens to see this, her name is Lynn Schneeweiss, and I'm very proud of her.
That is very sweet. Love to hear that. Last thing, what advice would you give to up-and-coming science students interested in helping law enforcement officers to solve crimes?
Well, I want to go back to the other question about all of the students that I've had. And even though I name one, there have been thousands of them, and I am proud of all of them. I want to make sure that gets in this little recording as well. What would I say to them? I would say be true to the science. And by being true to the science, you're being true to the evidence. And if you're being true to the evidence, every scene you go to, every item of evidence you test, then you know you have done your best job, your best work. Forensic scientists and the use of forensic science is not easy. And to quote one of my favorite movies of all time, A League of Their Own, it's difficult. If it weren't difficult, anybody could do it. And so forensic scientists are the best. They are the ones that do the hard work because a lot of other folks can't.
So many thanks to Patricia Cornwell and Dr. Marilyn Miller for joining us in these interviews. Next episode, we'll be looking at Rita Mae Brown's very, very cozy mystery, Wish You Were Here, set in Crozet, Virginia. And we got the chance to speak with local eminent Crozet historian Phil James and his wife Sally in their home. You can support us at su.edu/arts/English. I'm Andrew Wood, and I will see you in the next one.